Returning now to our top story, the deal to swap refugees and asylum seekers with Malaysia. The Immigration Minister Chris Bowen joined me from Kuala Lumpur earlier this evening to discuss the agreement. Chris Bowen, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Ali. Nice to be with you.
First off, just today the government's changed its mind and announced that the around 500 asylum seekers who are in limbo on Christmas Island will in fact be processed here. Up until this afternoon you insisted that they'd be processed in a third country. What's changed?
Well, we've adjusted our position, and that was the appropriate and responsible thing to do. That was an announcement the Prime Minister and I made on the 7th of May, and we made it clear then that we were in discussions with Malaysia and Papua New Guinea, and the government's position had changed, that people should not come to Australia based on the guarantee of being processed and resettled in Australia. Now, the discussions with New Guinea have taken longer than might have been envisaged, and Australia has agreed with Malaysia that we need to send a nice, neat and clean message that the 800 people who arrive after today will be people transferred to Malaysia. So the only responsible thing to do was to adjust that position, and that is a responsible and prudent decision. But
did you really only get that information today? I mean, you've been aware for some time that this deal with Malaysia wouldn't be retrospective, and indeed the political situation in Papua New Guinea has also been well known for some time.
Well, look, obviously, I think that was an important decision to make, and it reflected the government's position, and I think it was an element in the reduction in the number of boats arriving after that announcement, and a substantial and appropriate decision to make. But, and of course, I had been considering the various options, and I discussed with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister just shortly before I left for Kuala Lumpur the options, and issued the formal direction today to my department that people should be processed in Australia in that cohort. It's simply the only responsible outcome for those people.
Do you acknowledge, though, that it's a rather big backflip, given that the intention was to talk tough to act as a deterrent?
Well, if you want to talk about deterrence, and the position is clear from the signature today, it's a very substantial deterrent for people getting on the boat and coming to Australia, that Australia has entered into not just a firm commitment, but a final arrangement with Malaysia for the transfer of people back to Malaysia should they come to Australia by boat, and I think that is a very substantial deterrent.
And what happens to that deterrent and that message that you're trying to send once you've filled the 800 positions?
Well, Ali, we've been focused on this arrangement, and I think your viewers would understand that that has been taking my time and energy, finalising this arrangement and getting the signature today. The Minister for my Malaysian counterpart, Minister Hishamuddin, has made it clear he regards this as a pilot project, and if it works and is successful, then they will examine potential extensions, and that is completely consistent with my point of view. But let's just reflect on the arrangement that's been signed today. Let's let it operate. Let's see what effect it has, and then obviously we'd have more to say. But obviously I've also said that we would be happy to have discussions and arrangements with other countries in our region under the regional framework at an appropriate time.
Well, in terms of those health and welfare standards that Australia has pledged to pay the costs of, it's going to be in accordance with UNHCR's model of assistance in Malaysia. What exactly does that mean? How many healthcare centres are there? How many hospitals are there? How many education centres are there? And what are the standards?
Well, for health, that means that people will have access to UNHCR clinics. It means they'll have access to the Kuala Lumpur Hospital, for example, and other hospitals in the region for basic health care. And it means that if there are other health needs, more substantial health needs, then the IOM would consult with Australia about the appropriate way of dealing with those. And it means that people could have some reassurance that their health care would be appropriately dealt with. In relation to education, there are existing UNHCR and IOM schools and arrangements in place. That we codify, and many asylum seekers have access to those now, but we codify that every child in this arrangement would have access to those arrangements.
So how much is this going to cost? Because originally the package was priced at some $292 million. The Prime Minister reaffirmed today that $76 million of that will be transfer agreement costs. But if there's health, there's education, there's potential housing or other special assistance for 800 asylum seekers, they could be there for many years. What's the budget?
Well, the budget is as we outlined and as you've just correctly identified, and that's an allocation we made at the time, and that remains the allocation. And of course we built all those equations into the allocation. When we did that budget allocation, we had a pretty good indication of the services that would be provided, and we built those costs in.
Can you guarantee that it won't end up creeping up? I mean, some of those asylum seekers in Malaysia have been there for many, many years.
Well, that's a 4-year allocation, Ali, so that allocation for 4 years is the allocation. We've said we would continue to fund appropriate services and support for people until they're resettled out of Malaysia. You're right, that may extend beyond the forward estimates, but they're updates that will be provided in the budget papers as we go, based on the number of people yet to be resettled and the costs experienced up until that date.
The agreement, quote, will proceed on the basis that the UNHCR and the International Organisation for Migration can fulfil the roles envisaged. Have they agreed to provide the services? And if they haven't, will we be transferring any asylum seekers before everything is in place?
Yeah, yes, they have agreed, and we've been working very closely with them and taking them step by step. UNHCR has been consulted along the way, and as I said before, their feedback was very instrumental in shaping the final arrangement, and they've indicated that they will participate in the processing of the 800 and the 4,000 and on the implementation task force. Similarly, the IOM, I met with the Director General of the IOM, Bill Swing, when he was in Australia, and met with him again this morning. And we have been in discussions about their involvement, and they will be involved in implementing this arrangement.
What about unaccompanied minors who may be sent to Malaysia? If they arrive in Australia, you're the legal guardian. Who would be the legal guardian if they were sent to Malaysia?
Well, a couple of points about unaccompanied minors, again, because it's an important point and something which has been covered extensively. You can have no blanket exemptions to transfers from Australia to Malaysia, because that would send completely the wrong signal. That would send a signal that if you put your children on a boat, then they can get access to Australia and then they can sponsor you. And I do fear we would see boatloads of children coming to Australia and all the danger that that implies. But what we have said, based on UNHCR feedback, and it's the appropriate thing to do, is that we would have appropriate pre-transfer arrangements in place where we would assess the individual case of each child, we would assess their needs, we would assess what is the best way of handling them.
And who'd be their legal guardian?
Take a decision. Well, while they're in Australia, then they're under my legal guardianship, and when they're transferred to Malaysia, they'll be dealt with under Malaysian law, and they would be handled, and the IOM and the UNHCR would have similar support and care responsibilities.
So under Malaysian law, who would have the legal guardianship?
Particularly heightened care and support by the UNHCR and the IOM, but I stress the point that while they're under my guardianship or the relevant minister of the day, then we would have the pre-transfer guidelines ensuring that the best way of handling the future of that individual child was taken into account. I
understand that, but if you do decide to send a child, an unaccompanied minor, who would actually have legal guardianship? Would anyone under Malaysian law?
Well, under Malaysian law, and as reflected by this agreement, people transferred from Australia to Malaysia would be exempt from the Immigration Act and therefore would be under the care of the Malaysian government, and then through that process, as they're released into the community, receive the support and care of the UNHCR and the IOM with the assistance of Australia, and appropriate support would be in place for individuals.
But there's not the same arrangement as in this country, which is you've acknowledged you're the legal guardian. Your equivalent in Malaysia would not become the legal guardian.
Well, that's right. I wouldn't be the legal guardian for people when they're in Malaysia, and under Malaysian law, the Malaysian minister is not the legal guardian of UAMs, that's quite right, but there'd be other appropriate support and care in place through the UNHCR and the IOM. But again, I need to make the point that while there's no blanket exemptions, we would have quite exhaustive a process for assessing the individual needs of each unaccompanied minor or person who may I say, claims to be an unaccompanied minor, because we do have people who say they're unaccompanied minors when there might be evidence that they are actually older than that. That's not to underestimate the needs of people who are under 18.
Is there an appeals process? Is there a process to deal with complaints or concerns?
Well, a couple of points, Ali. Firstly, for those who are transferred to Malaysia, the UNHCR would process them in the normal way and consider their applications for asylum. And if they are regarded as refugees, the UNHCR would then seek resettlement outcomes for them, as they do in the normal course of events. Secondly, in relation to the whole operation of this arrangement, we have an implementation task force, which consists of Australia, Malaysia, the UNHCR and the International Organisation for Migration. And then we have an advisory task force as well, an advisory committee, which consists of those parties plus various non-government organisations who will be asked if they'd like to join to advise us on a day-to-day basis about the implementation arrangements.
And monitor? Will they have a monitoring role as well?
Well, of course, as an advisory group, they will have a role in receiving updates and I know how non-government organisations work. They'll be out there monitoring of their own volition, and Australia will be part of that implementation and monitoring task group as well.
Chris Bowen, many thanks for talking to Lateline tonight from Malaysia.
Nice talking to you, Ali. Good on you.